Welcome to Real Talk, a place where we have real conversations about faith, doubt, and everything in between. I'm your host, Reverend Thea Curry-Fuson, and today I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Reverend Michael Jarboe. Thanks so much for being here to have a conversation about new ways to do ministry. Why don't we start by just introducing yourself and why you said yes to come on this podcast today?
Yeah. Wow, that's the yes is just because anything Reverend Thea is doing, I want to be a part of, and I'm very honored to be invited today. My name is Reverend Michael Jarboe, pastor in the Texas Annual Conference, United Methodist Church. I'm at Memorial Drive, United Methodist Church on the west side of town, and I've been there for 11 years. I'm the senior associate pastor. And also, that kind of includes being the lead pastor of our contemporary offering and community called The Journey. We have a unique setting at Memorial Drive where we've got two campuses about an eighth of a mile down the road. We were landlocked in the early 2000s. And so what are we going to do? We're running out of space. And there was a dying shopping center just down the road that needed some more life. And so our church took a leap in, early 2000s and bought the shopping center. And over time have used some of its building spaces to acquire the Refuge, which is our youth center, other adult and then younger kid media and ministry centers, and then of course The Journey, our contemporary space. So very different feel than the classic sort of sanctuary space. It was an old Eckards that's been transformed into Eckards. That's a throwback. Mm-hmm. And the whole space is a bit of a throwback, and that's where we have our contemporary worship each week. So I preach there. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, and it's a great space.
You came out there one time.
Yeah, we came out to worship with you. Yeah. I am one of those pastors that can't take a Sunday at home, but I also love it I love to worship. I love to worship where I don't have to plan it.
Yes.
And to see my friends. When else
of course.
am I going to see you guys? So it was a great service. So.
Yeah, I was like, hey, Leslie, do you want to, I have the Sunday off. Can we go down to Central in Galveston? She's like, you mean just like go down there for church? It's like, yeah. So just hour south, saw Ginger and Julia Riley and others down there, and then drove right back up. I love it.
Yep.
We've got a lot of great offerings in Houston of church. So.
Yeah, good. So I wanted to start because I know people love to hear just kind of how'd your faith journey begin and how did it lead you into vocational ministry?
Oh, man. So growing up in the suburbs of Dallas, Irving, Texas, my parents were not church goers, and but my across the street neighbor, Becky, she had a son that was about my age, and Becky asked my mom when I was about 3 or 4 years old, "Hey, can I take Michael to the Cherub Choir at First United Methodist Church of Irving in the suburb there of Dallas?" And my mom was like, "We got to get him off the streets." No, I was 3 or 4, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But my mom said yes, and I started with singing in the little kids choir and then going to kids church. And eventually that kind of grew and I kept going on. I always say, like, I learned about my faith through the hymnal before I did the Bible. Mm-hmm. Like, it was singing the songs of our faith that really got me rooted in the church. And that's okay. Like, you don't have to be straight up scripture. Like, you find faith any way that you can. And so I grew up, and then by the time I was like 10 or 11 years old, I started then saying, "Hey, Mom, Dad, why don't you come to church?" That first Sunday, boom, they were at church, and we kind of created community there in that congregation for many years to come. So that's kind of how I got my start, was through the invitation by my across the street neighbor who happened to be the church organist who had a son my age. And, it's a little ask. And it was cool when I got ordained as a Methodist minister, United Methodist minister. She was there at that ordination ceremony some 25 years later or so. So very cool, full circle moment, and grateful for Becky, who was my first witness. I think as time went on, I always found myself connected with the church. And when I went off to college, I went on Sunday and immediately was like, I need to find a community because I had such a good one back at home. I went 3 hours away. I went to Centenary College in Shreveport, Louisiana, and a little Methodist school. It was nice for the scholarships because of my youth involvement, but didn't go there because it was Methodist. It was just kind of nice. It worked out that way. And so going and finding church was important. And over time, I found myself volunteering at like 3 or 4, 5 different churches. And I'm like a little spread thin. Got to get my work done. I was a journalism major, wanted to be a sports anchor or write for some sort of paper or ESPN. That was my goal. And over time, the leaders of those churches that I volunteered at or worked at, or they'd pay me a couple $100 or they'd buy me Tex-Mex, a little college student, they eventually say, you know what, Michael, you're really good at this. And over time, not only just are you good at this, but like you have a real passion for this. I see your heart in it. There's something different about you. Those little comments begin to add up. And I eventually started taking my fingers out of my ears to say, you know what? Maybe this is God using these people to speak to me in unique ways. And like, man, they're really pouring into me. And over time, it began, that still small voice began to speak even louder in my heart. And so I cast aside my journalism desires, and yet I write every week, right? I write. Those skills were valuable, and so pursued ministry. Went to Garrett Theological Seminary up in Chicago. Got out of the South for a little bit. Married my high school sweetheart, and then we moved down to Houston. But I really think I didn't have any of that Roman road moment that was huge. It was just a lot of different voices in different pitches and different ways that spoke to me. And I think that's sort of how my call to ministry, from Becky Whitfield across the street, invited me to the cherub choir, to other voices speaking into me. So I'm so grateful. And I try my own way today to be a little voice in other stories where I see calling begin to form. So that's a gift.
That aspect of what I also would agree, God speaking through other people, is one of the things that reminds me of the beauty of the Christian community, and even maybe the reason for it. If we're willing to be around other believers, then we will see and hear God through them.
Yes.
Because they are so much like us, or even how they're different, but that it takes these real life people to come around us and say things like that, or invite or inspire, or just show. Sometimes they speak the loudest with no words.
Right. Well, and our, growing up, your bull meter is high, and you can tell when someone's, giving you like a fake compliment. Those moments of authentic articulation of seeing something in another person matter when you are a budding or growing Christian. And those voices, they just still have, I can look at them and tell them what they said to me at what coffee shop, at what Tex-Mex spot, at what church lobby or narthex, that they said something that is formative today. So it matters when you're making real statements of faith and you're actually listening. You bring up a great point, is that part of the calling is listening and not doing all the speaking too,
Yeah. So what is it about ministry that makes you stay in it today? Pastors are dropping out of the game kind of quick.
Yeah, they are.
I think average is 7 years for a pastor, which is our nationwide average, not a United Methodist average. But, and I'm sure, being a pastor today, could have a long list of reasons why that is understandable.
Right.
But what is it about ministry that makes you stick with it? Why haven't you gone back to journalism? Why haven't you picked something else?
Well, and let me be frank. There are days that are tougher than others, and you're asking me on a different day, and I might be answering in a different way. I think in general, I think about the highlight reels of watching what the church can do in my life and watching it in others. And I think for me, there's something so countercultural to the polarizing world that we live in, that just is such a divide. And yet, and you can find churches that around all of Houston that everyone will agree exactly on what you want to believe. You can find that in Houston and in Chicago and anywhere you want. Why I'm not only passionate about the church, but specifically United Methodist Church, is because I know when I'm breaking the bread and serving communion on Sunday mornings, that I'm serving it to supporters of very different parties, of very different socioeconomic backgrounds, of very different beliefs socially and in other aspects. And yet they're shoulder to shoulder kneeling at the communion rail. And like that, those moments, if only they could be lived out in the world, like what a gift it could be. And we're trying to make that happen, teach people to do it. But even for one moment each week, and people can be reminded of that, the possibility that we don't have to be against each other. I think that moment is worth all the work in the world. It's worth turning in the reports that are just so annoying. It's worth doing the grunt work of pulling out chairs or, sweeping up spaces to find those individual moments along the journey of faith. Like all that work was worth it for that moment. Or when you see those light bulbs go off, like, oh, I'm starting to get it, right? Like, yeah, I'm starting to get it moments are beautiful. And let me tell you, I don't think our life in faith is ever supposed to be like you never reach the pinnacle, right? As John Wesley said, we're striving for perfection.
Yeah.
And I like that is as an extrovert, 7 on the Enneagram, who's got FOMO out the wazoo, who's always sometimes looking for the next best thing. I know that in the church, there's always a next thing. There's always a new thing possible. And there's always somebody searching.
Yeah.
And they're looking for Jesus, and we can be avenues and conduits for them to get plugged in more. So like, I think the never-ending possibilities of it bring me joy and keep me going.
Yeah. I love what you said about the whole a room full of people who are very diverse.
Yep.
And yet coming together in this communion, right? Co-union with one another and with God. And this year, specifically, God has really been just highlighting these moments of beauty and grace and sacredness that really only happen in the church. I think that those things, God is at work everywhere.
Sure.
And there are beautiful ways that we can connect and be in community and grow in our faith beyond the church, but these just really special moments that are happening. I remember this year, Ash Wednesday just hit me in a way
so good
that it hasn't before. Yeah. And as I looked at each person in the eye and told them, you're going to die, but with Jesus, you live forever,
Right.
Believe this truth and be changed by it. My eyes were full of tears and I could see their eyes. And it was just this very holy and sacred moment that amidst, some of my frustrations, I thought, this doesn't happen anywhere else.
And I love that Ash Wednesday happened on Valentine's Day this year. Like talk about this, like those idealistic images of like love and chocolate covered hearts and Hallmark cards, like the gaudy sort of love and sexuality and this sort of like overabundance of it mixed with this just sort of day of reminding of our mortality and like from dust you came and dust you shall return. Like that's not the cutest thing on a little Valentine's Day card, but that like, in a way, like that mixture of theology and culture right alongside each other. And that, you had your Valentine's Day candy, but you also got ash smeared on your forehead. Like, I love the juxtaposition of that. And that's what the church gets to do. Yeah. So you're right. Thank you for bringing up Ash Wednesday. It was a really poignant day this year for sure.
And isn't that, to me, the whole thing that makes death less scary is that through love, you live on. I mean, my grandmothers have passed away, but because I love them and we had a loving relationship, it's sometimes I almost forget that they're gone, that I can't just go over and see them, The same thing with other family members. It's because of that love, they live on. I remember when my first grandma passed away, I was telling all the younger cousins, hey, talk about her.
Yep.
Don't feel like you can't bring her up. Don't feel like if you accidentally say, well, Mammy used to, no, because if you don't talk about her, then the younger ones never know her.
Exactly.
and this is how she lives.
Yeah.
And she's not a bad word now. Like, we can talk about her,
Sure,
this is how she lives on. We continue to share that love she gave us, and then that love that we can share with others, that this is how she lives on. You mentioned something too about, your hope for the new things that keep coming.
Yeah.
And that's what I really wanted to focus on. We met, actually, I don't know if you remember, this first time I met you was at an innovation meeting.
Oh, yeah.
With my ordination class, I believe is what it was.
We were at the conference center, right? Or St. Paul's, somewhere around there.
St. Paul's, downtown. And
we did meet there.
Yeah, and just this instant kind of connection. You had this like excitement and energy that I really was like, okay. I think we were even like giggling through, and they're like, hey, shush, we're talking. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. We're
giggling.
having a moment.
But so I know that this is something that is really on your heart and your experience. But just talk a little bit about some of the new ways you've done ministry, or where you've brought in innovation to this old, sacred, holy thing called church.
I think for me, innovation has been it's been just kind of like plugging in like a new sort of power source for me, that I've gotten to think about the beauty of these traditions. First off, like, my context is an innovative one, in that we're meeting in an old Eckarts. We've got this contemporary worship with like fog machines and like a band that gigged the night before downtown in Edo, and they're coming together and they're playing this music. And yet we do communion every single week. We sing the doxology every week. We do the benediction every single week. There's sacred and secular practices right next to each other in an old Eckarts, in a shopping center, right next to a very active TJ Maxx. I never know if a person's coming in the parking lot going to TJ Maxx or coming to the church. Like, it's that juxtaposition. I think innovation in church settings are all about how do we juxtapose what's going on in our context with these foundational pieces of our church. And so we've had to be an innovative denomination recently, with a bunch of different shifts and changes, and a lot of the innovation has gone from the sort of the ivory tower rooms of our denomination to the local churches. And so I've gotten to be, because I'm on the conference leadership team, gotten to really witness a lot of churches taking that leap and saying, you know what, we're gonna try this thought. And one of the best things, and Melissa Mayer, I don't know if you've interviewed her, she's one of my faves. She's just like, fail beautifully. Like, the encouragement to fail is so huge. I think my very first experience, you talk about Ash Wednesday. I do this very funky service on Ash Wednesday called Electronica Ash Wednesday. And so it's all electronic music with those sacred practices of the distribution of ashes, or imposition of ashes. And it's a weird name. And I remember introducing it to my very close to retirement baby boomer senior pastor when I was first starting. I'm like 25 years old. I'm like, I want to do this thing. And it'll be at 8 a.m. in the morning and 9 p.m. at night. And it's going to be in the sanctuary. We're going to have all the lights, different colors. We're going to play electronic music. There's going to be videos. And he's like taking it in. Like, I remember him just going, like, very, like, it's like watching, like, it's a sitcom. I was like seeing myself like I'm about to be either just like let out to pasture, or this is wild. And he looked at me and just like, if you fail, you fail. I don't think you're going to fail. Give it a shot. And I will never forget that convo in his office that day, that he really said, he gave me the freedom to fail. Now, I know, like, it's a blessing that I'm in a context like Memorial Drive, where we have resources, where one maybe failed service is not going to like rock the whole boat. But he gave me a chance to do something. And I think if he would have said no that day, let's just wait a year, Michael, it might have stunted a little bit of my desire to do something innovative. And since that moment, it's just only propelled more things. And now folks look forward to that service often, and it's a different sort of thing each year. We've had artists from around Houston come for it. So it's very cool. So I think I'm getting to your point about like innovation being as something we need to keep doing in the church. And then number 2, just don't be afraid to fail and fail hard and beautifully if you're going to do it. And people will see and give you grace if they see you actually failing with gusto.
Yeah.
You know?
You mentioned, that you feel like maybe you're in a unique situation at Memorial Drive and with the resources.
Yeah.
But I mean, sometimes it's the he who has more to lose.
There you go.
Right.
You're not wrong.
And so let's talk about that for a second. There's a part of me that can totally appreciate and understand older churches or older church members who live in a world that has changed so fast.
Yeah.
And for the most part, they don't really understand, right? What is even going on in the world today. They don't, you don't understand what TikTok is. They don't understand memes. They don't understand internet culture. It's just nothing that they're experiencing, very distant. And what I believe is there's a longing and a desire for something they remember, something that feels comfortable and familiar. And so for me, I kind of have this sense of compassion for it. They want to come to church and it be exactly as it was in the 80s.
Yeah.
Or really, the 50s or 60s would be even better when they were children, right?
That's right.
Because we all have this nostalgic view of the past. And so there's a part of me that can understand that. And then you add lack of resources or just a fear.
Yeah.
Well, what if we spend money on this? Or not just money, time, energy, people, because those are also scarce resources in a lot of churches.
Yeah.
On this new thing, it doesn't work out. It doesn't give us the fruit we're wanting. Then what? That might be just another sign, symbol that we are failing.
Right.
And so I can hold on. Like, how do you deal with that, right? How do you confront that? How do you reconcile some of that reality that good church people have when it comes to change or something new or innovated or an electronic Ash Wednesday in the sanctuary? I mean,
how dare
out.
you? What are you doing?
Watch out.
For the record, I too have those thoughts. Yeah. This is not a baby boomer and older bashing. I'm just like, why can't these young families, like there was a family the other day that came through and it was after 9:30 service and they were teaching a class, Sunday school class, like a 3rd grade Sunday school class. And they came by and they're like, "Oh, Michael, good to see you, Pastor. Hope you have a great week." I was like, "Oh, are you just getting here?" They're like, "No, we taught Sunday school with our 3rd grader and we're going to head home." And I'm like, "Well, we have an 11 o'clock service. Why don't you just pop onto this?" They are 1 hour people. Mm-hmm. They gave their 1 hour. And in my little mind, I'm like, well, back in my day, right? I'm like, this, the guy who does innovation and millennial, like back in my day, we were 2 hour people. You came at 9:30 for Sunday school and then everyone went to 11 o'clock. And I wish it was back then. And I even say it in meetings sometimes, but this conversation is reminding me like, stop that. Stop trying to make 2001 happen again, Jarboe, and allow us to be okay with the reality that there are new things still happening all the time, and folks have shifted and changed. And when those folks who may have gone 2 hours when they were younger, they can't with the family dynamics, and this is all they're going to give. So what can we do to help? I think one other piece to sort of combat newness is what's helped us a lot is to put a start and an end time to new things. So a few years ago, we were running out of room at the Journey. And so we said, you know what? We're going to try a 5 o'clock service. We got 9:30, 11 o'clock, 5 p.m. service on Sunday. Whoa, this is kind of crazy. Even our band members were like, say what? Like, we need that post-church nap, and we got gigs all week next week. I said, let's try it. And we said, let's try it during the season of Lent. That gives us about 5 or 6 weeks to start to observe the change, the new thing, and then we know there is an end date. But guess what? If it is like rocking and we're like, this is like the best new thing and we feel like this is great, we can easily just say, hey, after Easter Sunday, we're going to keep this going.
Yeah.
Where you have also, hey, we're going to wrap up this 5 o'clock time. We're going to go back to our 9:30, 11 o'clock. When you have these seasons in the church already worked in, utilize them to your advantage. Try a new thing and have an acknowledged start and end time. That way it gives you a beautiful way to transition if the new thing's not working out. So you can start the next new thing after that. So that's how we do it a lot in the church. I know that's not uber innovative, but it's like incredibly helpful for our people to just navigate like, okay, I can handle this new thing right now.
Right. Or we'll avoid it for 5 weeks.
Yeah, right. Oh, 5 weeks, that's all? Great, I can do anything for 5 weeks.
Well, I think I heard a statistic recently, like men will have maybe 7 hairstyles their entire life.
That's a crazy stat.
And women will have like 150 or something. Like, I don't remember exactly. Every stat's made up. But it was like something like that. And I thought, well, yeah, because I think men have like a little boy haircut, a teenage haircut, a young man haircut, and an old man haircut.
That's right.
And for women, that's also, I think, more socially acceptable for us to change our hair more often.
Sure.
But that's one of the things that's okay about changing your hair. It's not forever.
It's not forever.
It'll grow out. You can re-dye it. You can cut it. Like,
so good.
It's nothing. Even a perm doesn't last forever.
Even
and so there's this kind of freedom where you can be a little more whimsical and kind of that. And so I can see where having an end date, knowing a change is temporary, at least set off that way, and it would be your choice to continue that change, right? Like, oh, I like it brown. I'm going to continue to go brown, whatever.
Right.
And so I think that that's something helpful. And like you said, that can help ease people in.
Yeah.
It also gives the leader, the innovator, the freedom to say, again, we're going to try it. Like, I'm not saying out the gate, this is going to be a success.
100%.
I think it's a great idea. I'm putting time and resources into it, but I'm not promising a grand slam. And so I think that's helpful too. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on like, why do we need this change? Why don't we just stay exactly how we were in the 1950s, or let's go back to that? What would be your answer to why should the church be open to new ideas, innovation, new ways to do ministry?
If we're people of God, God is not a static God. God is a God who changes. God is a God who moves. God is also, like, you're getting theological here, God is also never changed. God is always with us, but I don't believe God is up in the sky pointing down, throwing lightning bolts and being super static and saying, good luck on your own, right? God is with us and active, right? We're reminded of that seasonally at Advent, Emmanuel, God who is with us, right? And if God is with us, who can be against us? Okay, there's a scripture. But if God is with us, see, I had a Jesus juke you on that. If God is with us, then our lives shift and change, right? Like our hairstyles and like things that move, and we have to be folks. We Christians can so quickly be looked at and said, those are not adaptable people. And adaptive change, the more and more I read, is the most useful tool for Christian leaders and followers of Christ today. I mean, all of the disciples in the Gospels were adaptive change folks, or Jesus called them out for not being willing to adapt in the midst of change. Like, it's a part of who we have to be in today's world. It doesn't mean tossing out tradition. I actually like Dr. John Robbins was my senior pastor for a little bit of time, and he made the change, and it still sticks around. He said, I don't like the word traditional worship and contemporary worship. I like classic worship and contemporary worship. I'm like, classic? You like classic cars, right? Classic car is 1969 Mustang. But the one time it wasn't classic, and now it is. And the cool thing is, when you see that car come by, it's kind of like, that's actually pretty cool. And like, you can survey it and look at the beauty of its like older sort of nature or like long-standing past, and yet it still can be fresh today. You can make classic fresh today. And I like that sort of thing. And thinking about the church that's got this steeped history. One of the things that's happening in Memorial area where I live, he's got all these different pop-up churches that are like just launching, and they all got city. There's like Bayou City, Hope City. I'm not ragging on them. They're just like, they got city in the name. Miracle City Church, which is opened up at an elementary school near my house. Like, they're all popping up around here. Sure, they don't have the bureaucracy. They don't have a bunch of the history of Memorial Drive. Like, we've got so many different like discipleship cultures going on at our church. It's hard. And yet the thing we have the edge on other churches in our area is that 65-year history in this community. And when we think about the church has this just depth of history that can really be used to our advantage, but it doesn't mean we have to stay static. We got to be adaptive if we're going to continue to shift and change with people's needs.
Yeah. That's an interesting piece of that history. First United Methodist Church Pearland has been around for 130 years this year. Yeah. And
Man.
yeah, that's a long time.
It's a long time.
It's a long time. And so sometimes I have to remind myself, this is a 130-year-old system that I am working in. I've been here overall about 8 years.
Yeah.
And so can have to remind myself, okay, but that is still just a small piece. That's the majority of my ministry, but it's just a small piece of the whole church.
Right.
And that there's people who are raising kids who are well older than me at this church. And so reminding myself of how much history they have as individuals, but then collectively. But one of the interesting things is the city of Pearland is doing an old town historic survey.
Okay.
And so they reached out and said, you are one of the oldest churches in our city, and you're on one of the oldest streets in one of the oldest pieces. Like, we want you to be a part of this.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I just moved to Pearland. I don't know if I'm really the best person.
Yeah.
He was like, you are, because you are in relationship with these people, and we want to know what matters to them. We want, and so you could even see where a very secular organization is seeing the value that this long-standing community brings as they work to really, not really like upgrade, but to restore and to preserve the old town history of Pearland.
There's something powerful about being first. I mean, like new church plants aren't first, fill in the blank, right?
Right.
They got city in the title. So there's something beautiful about the history of churches, like local churches, and the United Methodist Church and Methodism has long been, from the big city square to little smaller towns all across the United States. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So my question is, as we talk about innovation and trying new things and striving to reach ideally new people, because I do think churches, we do a really good job at taking care of those who are already here.
Yep.
And getting us to kind of look out can be harder, which is something I think we do also see done a little maybe easier in a new church start.
Right.
They don't have a base to take care of yet. Yeah. So it's all about meeting new people. And I know that my time in a church plant, that was what was exciting and invigorating for me. And sometimes my exhaustion now can come from where all these church people come from, this is a different type of way to be. But what are some maybe possibilities of what might happen if the church refuses to try new things? I mean, what are some of those fears or possibilities, if we continue to say, we like it just like this, we're unwilling to take the risk, we're unwilling to spend the resources, we're unwilling to try, everybody else needs to figure it out and come join us. What might happen if we just refuse to be innovative or try new things at all?
Oh my gosh. If a church tries to stay the same, and there are churches we want it back like it was in 91. Great. And that's that signals to me a desire to go back to something that for them they thought was truly great about this church. Great. That is one thing. And I honor hearing those comments. Do I respond with as much importance to them? Maybe not. But then there's some churches, Thea, that are straight up no, we're not budging because our best days were in 95. And I've unfortunately watched that. I just remember just such a vibrant church in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that was sort of a sister church of mine growing up. We'd go to the same church camp. It was about 6 different churches, and they're all sort of in the same kind of metro area of Dallas. We'd all go to church camp during summer and come back. But this one was for sure the most lively, seemingly fast-growing church in that neighborhood. And I've got some clergy buddies who are up in Dallas and just asking like, hey, how is it this church? I won't say the name. And they said it closed 3 years ago. And the congregation, the community around it had grown very Latino and Latina. And eventually this small group of 20 white people just who would not budge, who would not dare acknowledge the shifts and changes and possibilities all around them as being this like beacon, long-standing beacon in this community, eventually had to shutter its doors and close. And just thinking about all the possibility it could, this big old building right in the middle of a community, what outposts could it have been beyond just Sunday morning and youth activities when there's no more youth coming to this church because you haven't made it a place where families with youth want to come. And it's hard to believe because the Wednesday night worships at this church back in 95, 90 to 2000 were epic. And if people could only know, and yet these folks wanted that and weren't willing to adapt. So it goes right back to that adaptive change piece. Read everything you can about adaptive change. It's there's too much from podcasts to books out there teaching us about how to be nimble. And I think that's like, if I had to like build a stew of ingredients of how to be a great church leader, I'd put the heaviest dosage of nimbleness ever in it, especially with all that's gone on in Greater Houston in the past decade, at least, from hurricanes to storms to upheaval to shift and change. You gotta be nimble.
Yeah.
And the churches that unfortunately close their doors, they don't maybe add a little sprinkle of nimble, but nothing, and it's just become bland. So I would just say, like, unfortunately, that is a tale that is fresh with me of unfortunate tale that lives with me that just says, don't go down the path of this church.
Yeah.
Be willing to be mindful. So the other day I was at Starbucks. I can't believe I said Starbucks on the podcast. There's a coffee shop near the church that just opened called Slowpokes. Shout out Slowpokes, all my Slowpokes followers. That's where people know me and connect with me at that coffee shop, kind of like Pearland Roasters for you guys. Slowpokes is so dear to me. But I was at Starbucks down the road not too long ago, and in line I heard from the church 3 different languages: Spanish, an African descent language, and another. And I just said, yeah, this is, less than half a mile from our church. And I'm hearing this in the line. But then you look at our church, and again, I don't need our church tomorrow to all of a sudden be a bilingual. And some folks want that immediately. We must be bilingual. We must have more nationalities than we can. That's not the goal. Like to force ethnic diversity in your church is just yuck. Like, don't do it. But don't close your eyes and clench your fist to it. Be mindful of the changes. There is data always around you to know what's happening in your neighborhood and what's going to be happening in the next 5 years. I think about Mission Insight stuff, right? That teaches us, like, here's the projections of what your neighborhood is going to look like in 5 and 10 years.
Yep.
Are you prepared? Because Mission Insight told that church in Dallas, you're not prepared. And they said, we don't need to be. The good old days will come back.
Yeah.
And they didn't.
You mentioned that nimbleness, which I would agree. And I wonder if that's not what another element that all the city churches popping up around you have. Again, my time at a church plant, new church, we were nimble. We were small. We were flexible. We had a new idea every other week, and we had the ability to shift and turn or try something once and totally redo it the next time. But how do you teach and or lead, inspire nimbleness in a church that's 130 years old?
That's a really great question.
How do you help, how do you help folks who are really ingrained in the way they're going to be to try something new. And I mention that because how often my therapist tells me I'm so brave to do therapy in my 30s because most of his clients are in their 60s and 70s.
Wow.
And he thinks, you're not going to do anything. You're not going to do anything different, you know? So how do you teach nimbleness to longtime churchgoers, whatever age that they might be?
My first thought on that is storytelling. Like, no matter how long, in 130 years, there are 100% images of nimbleness along the way. I remember probably my second year at Memorial Drive. So I started in 2014. No, it was my first year. My first year, kind of near the end. I'd done a full year. It was July. We got to August of 2015. And we have staff chapel every Monday morning. And I remember Chuck Simmons was a senior pastor at the time. He was months away from announcing his retirement after a 19-year career there. And he said, do you guys know what today is? Everyone kind of looked around. We were like, I mean, no. And he goes, it's been 10 years since Hurricane Katrina. And for Memorial Drive, my congregation, Hurricane Katrina and our efforts of caring for refugees and people moving from New Orleans and Louisiana, the Gulf Coast, coming to Houston along Mississippi and along there. I mean, they poured into Houston. Mind you, I'm a freshman in college that year in North Louisiana, so I'm in a whole different. But what they did was they fed you can say thousands of people that came in nightly for weeks. They provided a shelter for people. They opened up our we had a racquetball court. Yes, a racquetball court from the 90s that we had in there for the church. That racquetball court became a space where people could come and grab fresh clothes and underwear and undershirts and socks. It became like a little they called it Ann Mart because Ann Abels was the head choir director at the time, and she ran Post, and she was running shop there. It was back when Bishop Cynthia Harvey was on staff. And I mean, they will talk about, you can even speak to, when I brought it up to Bishop Harvey, you can see the glimmer in her eye because she gets emotional about how our church was nimble during that time. And sitting there a year into ministry, and Dr. Simmons started asking, what do you remember from that time? All of these staff members started standing up. Remember when this happened and we had to go and shift change? And remember Linnell, you and I, we ran over to Home Depot and we got all that stuff and brought it there. We made the box for that family that was in need of a toy box. And we put all those toys in. The family laughed, and it's just everyone's laughing. And then those of us who weren't there are just watching the excitement and joy reinvigorated 10 years later. And all that was what Dr. Simmons was doing was, and he said this much at the very end of his talk was, or his little chapel was, we have it in us. We have it in us. We have it in us to be nimble. We have it in us to be a church that can do that again. Don't forget those things. So I think for me, storytelling for older churches to remember where they came, and then for those of us who weren't there to hear those stories retold. It's not a book. It's not a 5-week course. It's storytelling.
Yeah, didn't Jesus do a lot of that storytelling to make sure we could kind of get it?
Jesus.
I love that you brought up Katrina. That's interesting. It's actually reminding me of stories I've heard about First Pearland, that they too were a shelter. They were a refugee spot. I know there's a family member who's still in contact with a family that they served during Katrina.
That's
kept
awesome.
up with them, had them over their home for dinner. Has just stayed connected through the years. And that's something that is, again, part of their DNA. And actually, to say that, it reminds me that Pearland's also a church that has been willing to be innovative, to try something new.
Right.
Even though it didn't always go exactly as they wanted to. And actually, Pastor Reggie and I have talked about that before, is that being a true neighbor
Yep.
It's a part of Pearland's DNA. I think about how they started upwards basketball, which is not just, hey, you're allowed to come play basketball in our gym. It's we're going to serve. We're going to be alongside you. We're going to be in a relationship with you. Our kids are going to join the team. And this true community involvement, their willingness to say, hey, we see that there's going to be growth out in Manville.
Yep.
We want to pour in. We want there to be a United Methodist presence there.
Yeah.
And while some of those things are no longer as they were, that's still a part of their DNA. So I love that
100%.
reminder of hey, this is who you are.
It's who you are.
This is a part of how you've been wired and what the Spirit is doing in this community. And again, where that whole time frame leverage kind of comes in of like, hey, over the many years, this isn't just a one-time fluke. You had some senior pastor with a wild idea. This is actually you. You have said yes to this. You have agreed, you've poured into this. You've made this happen. You've grieved the end and the loss.
Right.
But this is still who you are. This is who you're raising. This is how you're teaching other people.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite things actually about the itinerant system. This, pastors being moved, which all my non-Methodist friends are like, what? Why would you do that?
Oh.
But that reminder that it's the church. It's
the church.
you.
Yeah.
This is where you're going to raise your families.
Yeah, right.
This is where you are building real roots. And so who are you? And our job as pastors, I believe, is to come in and see that and remind them, right? Hey, look, this is who you are.
Yep.
And so how could we be that now in this season, in this climate, in this context, right? In this century.
Yes.
How could we be that now?
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about what might happen if we don't be willing to make some changes. What do you think might happen if we are?
If we are willing to make changes, we are going to have to, I think, first and foremost, know who we are. Like, if you're going to make changes, like, you got to have a strong base. Like, I think about my buddy Dan Lai, who went off to he went to University of North Texas on a scholarship, and he did and they've got a jazz degree there, and he's one of the best jazz musicians I've ever seen. And one thing he will always say was, I couldn't be as creative as I am in the jazz scene if I didn't know my scales. If I didn't know Bach, if I didn't know Beethoven, if I hadn't done that at first and then been able to, like, you don't just become a jazz musician from the start. You got to know the roots of the musical chords to then be able to play and scat and shift and change and do all those pieces, right? Same in the church. We need to know our foundation. We need to know our faith and theology. And if we've got that, then the new possibilities that come up, when they do fall flat on their face, we at least have that core back there. So I think that's first, like, be mindful, like, do you know your core? What is the soul of who you are as a church? And then if we're willing to try new things, we have to be ready for possibilities to come our way that we also don't expect. It's like, if I do this new thing, these people will come. Not necessarily. And these results will show up. Not necessarily. We interact with this thing called the Holy Spirit, which moves and shifts and leads in all sorts of different ways. So that's where nimbleness comes in. Are you ready for what the newness might bring? Who might come? What might happen? And if you're, again, it's just like, I just think about a basketball player as an offensive player is moving down, coming to go and shoot a basket. You're always taught to kind of keep your hands open, but also make sure that your feet are on the ground. Because if they're moving exactly where they are, you can't have like a base, right? And I hate to bring a sports metaphor, but I'm gonna drop one right now. And that's like a good way to think about new things coming our way. If we open the possibility for something to come, are we ready to have our hands both open and our feet planted? Yeah. That combo is not easy, and it can be a little uncomfortable. You might need to go see like a massage therapist afterwards, because you can get a little tense in your shoulders, but it's worth it, and you can defend and respond well.
I love that. I love what you said of, you got to know who you are. You got to know what you believe. And one of the ways to do that is do this really old thing that church has been doing for a long time. It's called read the Bible. It's called
What?
open that book.
Open
If you don't
that
understand your
book.
version, get a better version.
Yeah,
There's so many versions, and
Yeah.
I'm even would be tempted to say that.
Are you a
there's
CEB gal?
I like NIV.
Okay.
I like NIV.
Go, girl.
NRSV is pretty good.
Yeah, it's good.
But the message can also be really easy to take in.
Yeah.
And my belief is the Holy Spirit is there.
Oh, no
I don't
doubt.
care what translation you're reading.
No.
If you are going with the intention to seek God, God
Yeah.
will show up.
Yeah.
And maybe God will lead you to a better translation if that's what you need to be. But don't let that stop you.
That's good.
If you are reading a King James original, like maybe it is hard, get a new King James.
Yeah.
They've got a new one, and it's good too.
They do.
But reading the Bible, you're gonna see the stories
Yeah.
of humanity and all the things that we have tried and failed at,
Yep.
and all the places that God has shown up even still.
Yes.
Right? You're gonna see how the Spirit works. You're gonna learn this, and I would agree. You're gonna get your feet planted firmly of no, this is who God is.
Yep.
And even more, this is who God is calling me to be.
Yep.
And so if this opportunity comes, well, that's not really feeling authentic to me or to how God is present in this time. And trusting if it is the best, most awesome thing someone needs to do, somebody will do it.
Yep.
Right? But then also to say, hey, this thing coming, I think this is us, and at least be willing to try.
Yeah.
And again, I would say that reminder that when we fail miserably, God still prevails. I mean, isn't this the whole central idea of our faith?
Yes.
That even when we crucify God in the flesh, the Messiah, that he rises again
Right.
and says, that's not going to stop me.
Yeah.
You also said something of, we can't be held on this new thing is going to bring us new people, because what we tend to mean is that's going to bring us new people to act just like us.
Yeah. And look just like us.
Yes. And think like us and continue to support this thing that we've already are really trying to hold on to. So it has to be authentic. And I would say again, when you're reading that Bible, you're going to notice that Jesus never says, go out and recruit this many people. Go out and build this many people. No,
What?
he says, go and live this way.
Oh yeah. That's right.
Go and love
Yeah.
one another. Go and make disciples. And I didn't even ask you to keep account. Maybe that's not what you need to be worried about. Go live your life in this new way, right? Where men and women who are not related talk to each other.
What?
Where Jews and Gentiles eat together. Where you are worshiping in people's homes and in the market square. And yes, it's so great if you can make it to the temple, but if you can't,
Yeah.
you can worship right where you are,
Yeah, that's right.
like in an upper room over a nice meal. And so that, I think, again, that whole, let's get remembering who we are, and
Yeah.
that's going to inspire
Yep.
these really not even so new ways of doing things. It's actually a very, very old way. The way that Jesus did it was just getting to know people.
Yep.
And look what happened. The world has changed. We still live in the year of the Lord.
We still do.
In our secular, divided, non-Christian, we are still
Yep.
living under Jesus Christ's reign. And
Right.
so those are some things that I'm hopeful that we can see if we're willing to say, let's try something new.
Yeah.
Let's be willing to continue being around for another 130 years.
And a reminder, all that we said, thank you, Thea, for preaching to me. It was just a good word as well. Just remember that everyone has different lenses in how they see the world, and they read the scripture and they see God. And don't be afraid of other lenses coming to your church. And wrap your mind around other people seeing what you find foundational a little different. That's just, sometimes it's like, I just have seen people get caught up in that and caught up in like, they don't read scripture like I read scripture, or they don't see what I understand the church to be through this lens. How dare they not wear a sports coat into the sanctuary? How dare they,
Because that's in scripture.
it's right there, right behind. It's like Joss A. Bank 4 verse 6. No, just kidding. Sorry, I had to drop a Joseph A. Bank reference. Shout out, Joseph. I'm sponsored by Joseph. No, I'm not. I'm gonna get you in trouble. I'm sorry, Thea. What I'm basically saying is that it's important to be mindful that we all have different ways we see the world, and there is a place called the Church of Jesus Christ that is longing for all people to find their sacred worth at. Yeah. And we can be that in the world. What other place? Yeah. I'll say this. I also use Peloton. And I love my Peloton, and I get these classes and I get on, I'm pumped. I've preached about my Peloton rides. It's not pretty, but I get through those classes. But the speaker will, this guy named Cody Rigsby, who I take his class a lot. He's like shouting out names. He's like, riding for tacos, 412. All right, good job today. Shopping and rocking, it out. 1-3, awesome, good job. And like going through all these, and one time I just riding, and he goes, "This is my church. Great job today. You hit 100,000 rides, not 100,000. You hit 100 rides or something like that." But like, the username for the person was, "This is my church." What is that? And it just was kind of like, this is this person's church. The church for them is this distant online community where they in some way feel seen, some way feel loved, and they are not getting it from the local church wherever they are, because I know there is one. There's a church in every city, but they're finding church here. So if we don't take up the space of being the people of God and being a community, welcoming folks, they're going to find it in other ways. And there's so many avenues, from CrossFit to Peloton to your kids' soccer team, to the Houston Astros fan club that meets at the local brewery down the road. Like, those can be churches for people who don't feel like there's a church for them. And we have got to say, what are they doing that's making a difference in a person's life? And can we as a church today release the shackles of we have to look the same at all times as we did in 1995 and say, they're doing something right. Can we learn from them? Maybe even, partner with them and be the church. So when I heard that, I said, man, that's hard to hear someone, but also what can we learn? What can we learn?
And what I hear and see as someone who, because of all my time at the church, don't have a lot of time for those types of things, is maybe a piece of acceptance. Yeah. Right. Yeah. A piece of acceptance. You talked, about Ginger's church down in Galveston, and this reminder that, we first have to belong. Yep. And then we might believe versus come and believe like us. And then you can belong.
Then you can belong.
And I think that's a really big shift that I am hopeful, if we don't make any other changes, that our church as a whole could make that change to say, first you belong because you're a human.
Yep. Yes.
Because you are a child of God.
Yes, there it is.
Because you were knit together in your mother's womb for great and wonderful things. Yeah. And so you belong here. And maybe with us, by extending a true belonging, you'll at least be willing to hear what we believe. Yeah. And maybe you'll believe the same, or maybe you won't. And that'll be okay too, because you still belong. And how what that change might really be like for the world, for the world that is so hungry and lonely and sad and anxious and afraid and isolated, that you belong. I think that's also why people are at coffee shops. I mean, we're over caffeinated and over sugared, but we're also, I'm allowed to come in there. As long as I can pay for a $7 coffee, I can come in here and I can hang out all day. Yeah. For the most part.
You can, that's right.
And so I belong here. And, you mentioned, you got your coffee shop. I know I have mine too, where I go in and they know my name and they know my order. And, and I feel like, wow, this place has accepted me, you know?
Right.
But I think that there's that. And then I would even say that this is, I think, why podcasts are booming too.
Yes.
It's the good ones build a community where
Right.
people feel they're a part of it. You know, they're a part of that conversation. And that's really the whole reason why we started this is like, hey, we've got to be willing to take these conversations beyond our church walls.
That's right.
Right? Let's meet people where they are, in their car, on their phones.
Yep.
Let's meet them there and let's have some honest conversations about who Jesus Christ really is.
Well, why
and
not?
how we see that.
Yeah,
happening.
why not utilize another touch point? I mean, Thea, right? I mean, Thea, that's exactly why we do a podcast at our church is you see them on Sunday mornings and you don't again. Can you find another touch point in cars and on phones that is valuable? So I love what you guys are doing down here in Pearland, and just know it's being watched and beloved from up in the West Houston area.
Well, thanks again for being here today. I appreciate you sharing your insight and your ideas. I like to usually close with just one offering of hope. What would you offer to someone who is maybe sensing change or a desire for something new? What would be your wisdom of hope for someone wanting something new?
I think I always think about this Eleanor Colvin quote. She's a pastor at Westbury in the Sharpstown, Westbury neighborhood. And I remember someone asked her once, why do you, we were in the same ordination class, and they said, why do you do the work that you do? Why do you love it? And what's so important to you? And she said, when I get a chance to help people experience the divine, that is my greatest gift. And it always begins with curiosity. I'm like, oh man, that's like, she wrapped up everything I could say in a beautiful little statement like that. Like, if a Christian or a follower of Christ or someone even new to it, if curiosity isn't always a part of our lives, then we've flatlined in our faith. And God calls us to be curious people. So I would say to friends, to experience the divine, if you're thinking about it, stay curious. And in that curiosity, that kind of questioning, maybe even a little doubting, it's good for the soul. It's helpful. So stay curious is what I'd tell people for a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
Who knows? Who knows what's out there?
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for tuning in. We want to also make sure you're aware, if you're listening tonight, August 7th, will be our Real Talk live event at 6 p.m. at Lit Java, new coffee shop here on Broadway. I hope you'll come check it out. We're going to have an honest panel conversation on why are Christians hard to love? And you'll have an opportunity to participate in that conversation. So I hope you come and bring a friend. And we'll see you next time on Real Talk. Thanks for tuning in. Real Talk Podcast is produced by First United Methodist Church Pearland in collaboration with Pearland Podcast Studios, recorded here in Pearland, Texas. We invite you to check out our website at fumcpearland.org to check out additional events and opportunities for you to engage in real talk about faith and relationships.